Jimin walked out, but Jungkook's last words made the staff gasp loudly. Crying face fire. The sound of something shattering against the floor echoed through the studio just as Jimin spun toward the exit, and Jungkook's voice, raw, breaking, trembling, cut through the chaos like a blade slipping through silk. If you walk out now, you'll never know the truth I've been hiding from you. Every staff member froze. The overhead lights hummed faintly, dust floating in the air, catching the glow like frozen sparks from an argument gone too far. Jimin didn't turn back. Not yet. But his shoulders flinched with a micro-hesitation that betrayed how deeply that sentence struck him. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste like metal, like cold. Moments earlier, the atmosphere had been ordinary, monitors humming, producers reviewing takes, stylists prepping notes. And then everything detonated without warning. Jungkook stood with his breathing uneven, fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale. His jaw trembled with the words he had been swallowing for far too long. His mind flashed with the fear he never admitted aloud, the fear that if he spoke too late, Jimin would be gone from his orbit forever. But Jimin, driven by an equally powerful storm of confusion, betrayal, and a history of avoided conversations, kept walking. The studio door was just 3 steps away. 3 steps that felt like the end of something too precious to lose. To everyone else, this looked like an argument between two idols who had worked together for years. But beneath the surface ran deeper currents, unspoken memories, unresolved promises, and a secret Jungkook had buried so carefully that even he was terrified of digging it out. He watched Jimin's back, tense, rigid, glowing with the harsh reflections of the studio light. And for the first time in years, Jungkook felt powerless. Jimin reached for the door handle, cold metal brushing his palm. He didn't know why his hand shook. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe the truth Jungkook hinted at was something he wasn't ready to hear. Every step he took away from Jungkook felt like walking through thick water, slowing him, questioning him. He told himself he had every right to leave. Jungkook had crossed a line today, snapped under pressure, accused him of abandoning him emotionally, blamed him for a silence Jungkook himself created. The weight of misunderstandings had been building for months, each one tucked under the surface like stones, dragging them into darker places. But Jungkook's last words still clung to Jimin's spine like a hand that refused to let go. You'll never know the truth I've been hiding from you. Jimin's breath hitched. He closed his eyes, letting the cold of the metal door seep into his skin before he forced himself to step out into the corridor. The hallway was dimmer, echoing the muted hum of distant equipment. It smelled of dust, fabric softener, and something achingly familiar, Jungkook's cologne lingering from earlier when they had walked in together, laughing about a joke neither could remember now. Jimin leaned his back against the wall, pressing a hand over his eyes. The argument replayed in fragments, Jungkook's frustration, his raised voice. The moment Jimin felt something fragile crack inside him, he had always been the one to smooth things over, to understand, to forgive. But today, something inside him snapped too, leaving jagged edges. Back inside the studio, Jungkook stood frozen as the staff exchanged tense glances. No one dared speak first. No one wanted to breathe wrong. Finally, Jungkook exhaled a shaky breath and stepped toward the door. His heartbeat hammered against his ribs with painful urgency. He wasn't thinking about cameras, schedules, or reputations. He was thinking of Jimin leaning against a hallway wall alone with a hurt Jungkook had caused. He had spent too long hiding behind jokes, smiles, and quiet avoidance. Too long hoping Jimin would read what he never said aloud. Too long fearing that the truth would ruin everything. Now, with the possibility of losing him pressing down like a weight on his chest, Jungkook felt his fear transform into something sharper. Resolved, he pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. Jimin didn't look at him, but Jungkook could feel the tension in the air vibrate between them. He approached slowly, every step deliberate, every breath careful. His voice, when it finally emerged, was softer than before. "You didn't even let me finish." Jimin swallowed. "Because I didn't want to hear another excuse." "It wasn't an excuse." "Then what was it?" Jimin's voice cracked, quiet but sharp, like a small wound that still bled. Jungkook stopped just a meter away, close enough to see the tightness in Jimin's jaw, the slight tremble in his fingers. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself before he spoke again. "It was the truth I'm scared to tell you." Jimin blinked, and for the first time since he walked out, he looked directly at Jungkook. The hallway lights flickered faintly above them, casting shifting shadows across Jungkook's face, making his eyes look darker, more vulnerable. What truth? Jimin whispered. Jungkook didn't answer right away. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out something small and creased, a folded note, edges worn from being handled too many times. He pressed it into Jimin's hand, his fingers brushing Jimin's knuckles with a hesitant, electric touch. I wrote this months ago, Jungkook said, voice barely steady. I never had the courage to give it to you. But everything kept getting worse because I stayed silent. Jimin stared at the note, feeling its weight as if it were heavier than paper. His heart drummed a confused, anxious rhythm. What is this supposed to fix? Maybe nothing, Jungkook admitted. Maybe everything. But you deserve to know what's been eating me alive. Jimin opened the paper slowly. The handwriting was unmistakably Jungkook's, messy, slanted, emotional. And as he read, breath by breath, the hallway grew impossibly quiet. He reached the final line and felt his knees weaken slightly. I didn't want to lose you, so I stayed quiet. And by staying quiet, I started losing you anyway. Jimin closed the note with trembling fingers. When he lifted his eyes, Jungkook was watching him with a fear so raw it was almost painful to look at. Why didn't you just tell me? Jimin asked. Because the truth is complicated, Jungkook whispered. And I didn't want it to change everything between us. Jimin stared at him for a long moment. And then, to the surprise of everyone who had silently gathered at the studio doorway, he stepped closer. Jungkook, everything has already changed. But his voice was gentler now. Softer. Not accusing, just honest. Jungkook lowered his head, the weight of months of silence finally breaking free. I know. And I'm sorry. For all of it. Jimin took a slow breath. So tell me the part you didn't write. Jungkook looked up, meeting Jimin's eyes with a courage he had long avoided. And with a voice that shook, he confessed the truth that had lived inside him for far too long. It wasn't anger, Jungkook said. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't pressure. It was fear. Fear of how much I needed you. Fear of how much you mattered. Fear that if I said it out loud, I'd ruin everything. Jimin's chest tightened at the sincerity in the words, the way Jungkook's voice carried a tenderness he had forgotten Jungkook was capable of showing so openly. Then why tell me now? Jimin asked quietly, because losing you scares me more than the truth ever will. Jimin closed his eyes and let the words settle into the fragile spaces that had been hurting for so long. When he opened them again, there was no anger left, just exhaustion, vulnerability, and something softer blooming beneath the surface. He took one step forward, closing the distance between them. Then don't stay silent anymore. Jungkook nodded, and for the first time since the argument began, a hint of relief flickered across his expression. The hallway felt warmer now. Less harsh. Less sharp. Jungkook took a shaky breath. Can we try again? Jimin let the silence stretch just long enough for Jungkook to feel the weight of the answer. Then, with a quiet exhale, he nodded. We can. The staff, who had been holding their breath in the shadows, finally relaxed. And in that dim hallway, under flickering lights and the echo of almost broken hearts, Jimin and Jungkook found the beginning of something truthful, painful but real, fragile but sincere. A beginning that didn't need a cliffhanger. A beginning that finally allowed both of them to breathe. And as they walked back into the studio together, side by side, the air felt different, lighter, warmer, filled with the possibility of a future rebuilt on truth instead of silence. A future that neither of them would run from anymore. The door clicked shut behind them as Jimin and Jungkook re-entered the studio, but the air between them remained charged, raw, trembling with everything they had said and everything they had not. The staff quietly excused themselves, pretending to check cables and screens, but their eyes flicked toward the two men with helpless curiosity. Even the room seemed to hold its breath. Jungkook took a slow step closer to Jimin, and the soft scrape of his sneaker on the floor sounded far too loud in the silence. Jimin's pulse jumped. He didn't move away, didn't say anything, just watched as Jungkook closed the distance inch by inch with a hesitation that felt more dangerous than confidence. You're still shaking, Jungkook murmured. Jimin's breath caught. I'm not. You are, Jungkook whispered, gaze dropping to Jimin's fingers, which were still curled stiffly around the folded note. You read everything. Jimin exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. He didn't want Jungkook to see how deeply every word had cut, how the confession still echoed inside him like a haunting melody he didn't know he had been waiting for. Yes, Jimin said quietly. I read it. Jungkook leaned a hand against the table beside Jimin, close enough that his arm brushed Jimin's. The contact sent a ripple of heat through both of them, a reminder of how fragile the space between anger and longing could be. I didn't expect you to look so. Jungkook paused, searching Jimin's expression with eyes that were too dark, too earnest. Hurt. Jimin let out a low, humorless laugh. What did you expect? That I'd smile? Thank you for hiding things from me. I didn't want to lose you, Jungkook said again, more forcefully this time. And I thought silence would protect us. Jimin turned his head sharply, locking eyes with Jungkook. They were too close now, so close that even the word silence felt heavy between their lips. That's the problem, Jimin said. You always think you're protecting me. You never think I can handle the truth. Jungkook's jaw tightened. His breath warmed Jimin's cheek. I didn't think you wanted the truth. Not wanting it, Jimin whispered, is different from not being given the chance. Jungkook lowered his head, guilt visible like a shadow across his face. He looked younger, more breakable, nothing like the confident persona he wore on stage. His voice trembled, but he didn't back away. Instead, he moved a fraction closer, close enough that Jimin could feel the warmth radiating from him like a slow-burning flame. I should have told you everything, Jungkook said, barely audible. You should have, Jimin replied, matching his softness. For a moment, neither spoke. Their breaths mingled in the narrow space between them. The tension grew thick and electric, humming beneath their skin. Jungkook lifted a hand slowly, cautiously, as if approaching something sacred. His fingers hovered near Jimin's cheek, painfully close, but he didn't touch yet. May I? Jungkook whispered. The request was so gentle it hurt. Jimin didn't answer with words. He tilted his head just enough for Jungkook's fingertips to brush his jaw. The contact was featherlight, trembling, but it ignited something volatile, like striking a match in a room already filled with gas. Jungkook sucked in a quick breath at the softness of Jimin's skin beneath his touch. Jimin closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into the warmth before catching himself and stepping back slightly. You can't do that, Jimin said softly, voice wavering. Jungkook's expression tightened with surprise. Do what? Touch me like you're afraid, Jimin whispered. Or like I'll disappear. Jungkook took a dangerous step forward, closing the distance Jimin created. Their chests brushed lightly, breath hitching in unison. Jungkook met his eyes with a heat that hadn't been there minutes ago, a heat forged from fear, regret, and something deeper. Then how do I touch you? Jungkook murmured. Jimin swallowed, heart pounding. Like you mean it. Silence cracked open between them, sharp and trembling. Then Jungkook's hand lifted again, slower, steadier, no hesitation this time. He cupped Jimin's jaw fully, thumb grazing the corner of his mouth. Jimin's breath escaped in a soft, involuntary sound that made Jungkook's pulse stutter. Is this, meaning it? Jungkook asked, his voice deeper, rougher. Jimin looked up at him through his lashes. You tell me. Jungkook moved closer still, their noses nearly touching. The warmth of his breath ghosted across Jimin's lips, and the air thickened with dangerous possibilities. Jungkook's thumb slowly traced the curve of Jimin's lower lip, soft, deliberate, a touch charged with quiet longing. Jimin's knees wavered. You're not walking away this time, Jungkook whispered. Not until we finish this conversation. Conversation? Jimin breathed. Is that what this is? Jungkook's lips almost brushed his. It can be whatever you want it to be. Jimin exhaled shakily, eyes flickering down to Jungkook's mouth for a split second too long. Jungkook caught it. He always caught it, Jimin, Jungkook said, voice suddenly raw. Why are you shaking now? Jimin clenched his jaw, trying to steady himself, trying to form an answer, but Jungkook leaned in impossibly closer, whispering directly against the edge of his mouth. Tell me, he breathed. Is it anger? Or is it something else? Jimin's hands tightened at his sides. You know what it is. Jungkook's eyes darkened. I want to hear you say it. Jimin's heartbeat thundered, his chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. He didn't know who moved first, maybe it was both of them, pulled by the same gravity, but the space between their mouths felt dangerously thin. Jimin placed a hand on Jungkook's chest, pushing gently, not to stop him, but to ground himself. His palm felt Jungkook's heartbeat hammering as wildly as his own. "You drive me crazy," Jimin whispered, voice breaking. "That's what this is." Jungkook breathed out a shaky laugh, relief, disbelief, something hotter simmering beneath. His forehead gently pressed to Jimin's, closing the last sliver of space between them without crossing the line they weren't ready to cross. "Good," Jungkook murmured. "Because you do the same to me." Their breaths tangled again, dangerously soft, dangerously close. The heat between them radiated like a storm contained only by the fragile restraint they both clung to. Jimin's fingers curled into Jungkook's hoodie, pulling him an inch closer, not enough to break anything, but enough to admit everything they'd avoided. "Jungkook," he whispered. Jungkook hummed softly. "Yeah. Don't make me regret staying." Jungkook's eyes softened, but the intensity never faded. He lifted Jimin's chin gently, guiding his gaze back to him. "I won't," he promised. "But you have to let me try." Jimin inhaled slowly, letting the promise settle in the space between their bodies. And finally, he nodded. Jungkook's hand slid from Jimin's jaw to his shoulder, lingering, warm, steady. Jimin didn't pull away this time. He let himself stay close, let himself feel everything: anger, longing, vulnerability, relief. Let himself feel Jungkook. The room was silent around them, but their hearts were not. They beat loudly, desperately, as if trying to communicate all the things their mouths couldn't yet say. Jungkook stepped even closer, chest pressing fully to Jimin's, breath warm against his cheek. He spoke in a whisper that felt like a confession. "Stay with me. Here. Like this." Jimin's breath trembled. "For how long?" "As long as it takes for us to stop pretending." Jimin closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words wash through him like warmth in winter. When he opened them again, Jungkook was already watching him with a softness so sincere it felt dangerous. And then, finally, Jimin rested his forehead against Jungkook's chest, letting himself breathe him in, letting himself be held, even if it was just for tonight. Even if it was fragile and uncertain. Jungkook's arms wrapped around him slowly, almost reverently. The hug wasn't desperate this time, it was grounding, warm, honest. Jimin melted into it, his fists slowly unclenching as he allowed himself to feel safe in the embrace he had been avoiding for too long. Under the studio lights, in the quiet that followed the storm, two hearts that had collided fiercely and painfully now found a moment of fragile peace, held together by truth, apology, and a tension too deep to ignore anymore. The studio lights dimmed as the staff quietly slipped out, giving Jimin and Jungkook space without having to be asked. The door shut with a soft thud, and suddenly the room felt too quiet, too intimate, filled only with their uneven breathing and the low hum of equipment cooling down. Their bodies were still close, Jimin's forehead against Jungkook's chest, Jungkook's arms wrapped around him with a tenderness that felt at odds with the explosive argument they'd had not long before. Jungkook didn't speak at first. He just held him, his chin brushing Jimin's hair, breathing in the familiar scent of shampoo and warm skin. It wasn't a desperate embrace anymore. It was steady, claiming, almost protective. Jimin didn't realize how long it had been since he'd felt this version of Jungkook, quiet, honest, unguarded. Eventually, Jimin pulled back slightly, but Jungkook's hands remained on his waist, refusing to let the distance grow too wide. Jimin looked up, their faces almost level now, his eyes searching Jungkook's with a softness he hadn't allowed himself to show earlier. "We're still not finished," Jimin whispered. Jungkook nodded slowly. "I know. I'm not running from this." Jimin took in the answer, then reached up and lightly gripped the front of Jungkook's hoodie, pulling it taut. The gesture wasn't aggressive, it was grounding, like he needed something solid to hold onto before the storm inside him reached the surface again. "You say the truth is complicated," Jimin said softly. "So explain it. No more notes. No half answers. Tell me what you've been hiding." Jungkook's throat bobbed with a swallow. He didn't look away, but Jimin could see the flicker of nerves in his eyes, a rare sight that tightened something deep in his chest. "Sit with me," Jungkook said quietly. They moved to the couch near the monitors. Jimin sat at one end, leaning back cautiously. Jungkook sat beside him but angled his body fully toward him, knee brushing Jimin's thigh. Jimin felt the spark of contact like a jolt, but he didn't shift away. Jungkook's hand rested between them, palm up, an offering, not an expectation. Jimin glanced at the hand, then slowly, deliberately, placed his own on top of it. The warmth was immediate. Jungkook exhaled deeply. I didn't tell you, Jungkook began, voice low, because I didn't know how to handle it myself. Jimin's fingers curled around Jungkook's instinctively. Handle what? Jungkook studied their joined hands for a moment before lifting his gaze. I started feeling things about you, and I thought if I ignored them, they'd disappear. Jimin stilled. Jungkook continued, voice trembling with honesty he could no longer hide. But they didn't. They got stronger. And I panicked. Every time you smiled at me. Every time you touched me. Every time you trusted me with something real. Jimin's heartbeat echoed loudly in his ears. He didn't breathe, so I pulled away, Jungkook confessed. Not because I didn't want you close, but because you were getting too close. Jimin's lips parted slightly, disbelief and emotion mixing in his stare. You didn't lose feelings, Jungkook continued. You were the one thing I couldn't control. And that terrified me. Jimin swallowed hard. You hurt me by shutting me out. I know. Jungkook reached up, brushing his thumb along Jimin's jaw with a tenderness that made Jimin's chest ache. And I hated myself for it every single day. Jimin held Jungkook's wrist gently, as if anchoring himself to the moment. Why didn't you just tell me you were scared? Jungkook gave a sad, crooked smile. Because fear doesn't sound good coming from me. And I didn't want you to see how much power you had over me. Jimin inhaled shakily. Power isn't the right word. Isn't it? Jungkook whispered, leaning closer until their knees pressed fully together and Jimin could feel Jungkook's breath fan across his cheek. You walk into a room, and I forget how to act. I get quiet. Or I get loud. Or I tease you too much. I do anything except what I actually want. Jimin forced his voice steady. And what do you actually want? The question hung in the air, heavy and trembling. Jungkook's hand slid from Jimin's jaw to the back of his neck, fingers threading through the soft hair there. Jimin stiffened, but his body didn't move away. He felt the warmth of Jungkook's palm, the steady pressure, the way Jungkook's breath caught when his thumb brushed the curve of Jimin's neck. I want to be close to you without feeling like I'm crossing a line, Jungkook whispered. And I want to hold you without wondering if I'm imagining everything between us. Jimin exhaled, voice barely audible. You're not imagining it. Jungkook froze. Jimin kept going, the dam finally breaking. I was hurt because I thought you didn't feel anything at all. I thought I was the only one, losing control. Jungkook leaned in so close that their foreheads touched. His voice dropped to a hushed, trembling tone. You're not the only one. Heat simmered between them again, stronger than before, more dangerous because it came with clarity instead of confusion. Jimin's fingers slid up Jungkook's arm, slow and uncertain, but Jungkook shivered at the touch. Jimin didn't miss it. You're trembling, Jimin murmured. Why? Because you're touching me like. Jungkook swallowed hard, eyes fluttering closed for a second. Like you want me to fall apart. Jimin's lips curved in the faintest, most fragile smile. Maybe I do. Jungkook opened his eyes, dark and full of something raw. Jimin, without thinking, Jimin moved even closer, their thighs pressed together, their breaths mingling. You said you want to be close without crossing a line, he whispered. Then tell me where that line is. I don't know anymore, Jungkook confessed. Not when you look at me like that. And how am I looking at you? Jimin asked softly. Like you're about to break me. Jungkook breathed. Jimin's voice dropped to a soft, dangerous whisper. Maybe we're breaking each other. Jungkook inhaled sharply, and his fingers tightened slightly at the back of Jimin's neck, pulling him closer, not fully, not enough to destroy the fragile restraint between them, but enough to make Jimin gasp softly. Jungkook, Jimin whispered, voice trembling. Yeah, Jungkook answered, just as breathless. Don't hide from me again. I won't. Not anymore. Jimin's eyes softened, but the intensity didn't fade. He slowly placed a hand on Jungkook's chest, feeling the rapid thump of his heart beneath his palm. Then say it, Jimin whispered. Say what you've been wanting to tell me. Jungkook's breath stuttered. His hand slid from Jimin's neck to his cheek, thumb brushing his skin with reverence. I care about you, Jungkook said quietly. Too much. More than I know how to handle. Jimin's heart clenched at the honesty. That's not something to be afraid of. It is, Jungkook whispered, leaning his forehead against Jimin's. Because once I say it out loud, it becomes real. Jimin's fingers tightened in his hoodie. Then make it real. The room was silent except for their breathing, the tension thick enough to feel on their skin. Jungkook's thumb brushed Jimin's cheekbone, slow and deliberate. I want you, Jungkook whispered, voice shaking with vulnerability he never showed to anyone else. Not just as a friend. Not just as someone I care about. I want all of you. Jimin exhaled shakily, heart pounding, eyes burning with something deep and overwhelming. Then don't let go of me. Jungkook's hand slipped to Jimin's waist, warm and firm, pulling him a little closer until their bodies aligned. Jimin didn't resist. He lifted a hand to Jungkook's jaw, thumb brushing his lower lip with a touch that made Jungkook's breath falter. Jimin's voice softened to a whisper that vibrated between their lips. I won't run. Jungkook closed his eyes, exhaling a breath that sounded like relief and surrender all at once. Neither will I. They stayed close, breaths mingling, bodies drawn together by something neither wanted to fight anymore. Heat hummed under their skin, undeniable, inevitable, no longer buried beneath fear or silence. For the first time in a long time, they weren't speaking around the truth, they were speaking through it. The night pressed heavily against the narrow studio hallway, the air strangely loud with silence. Jimin stood there as if rooted to the floor, staring at the door Jungkook had slammed shut minutes earlier. His pulse hadn't calmed. Neither had his breathing. Something in Jungkook's eyes, dark, shaken, almost pleading, still clung to him like heat that refused to fade. He should leave. He told himself that twice. 3 times, but his hand lifted anyway, trembling slightly as he pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dim except for the soft blue glow from the computer monitors. Jungkook sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, head dropped low, hands gripping his hair as though fighting something inside himself. He didn't look up when the door clicked closed behind Jimin. Jungkook, Jimin whispered. Jungkook's shoulders tensed. Slowly, he raised his head. His eyes were red, not from crying, Jimin thought, but from trying too hard not to. You shouldn't be here, Jungkook murmured, voice low, rough, dangerously close to cracking. And you know I wasn't going to listen to that, Jimin answered. Jungkook laughed once, short and humorless. That's the problem. You never listen when it comes to me. Jimin stepped closer, the floor faintly creaking beneath him. Because you always say things you don't mean. Jungkook's gaze sharpened, lifting fully to meet his. You think I didn't mean what I said earlier? Yes, Jimin said. Or maybe you meant it but you weren't ready to admit why. Jungkook stood abruptly, the sudden movement slicing the space between them. His chest rose and fell fast, and Jimin felt it, felt everything, like an invisible pull dragging him closer even though neither of them moved. You think you know everything about me, Jungkook hissed softly. I know you better than anyone, Jimin replied, matching his tone, stepping forward until his breath hit Jungkook's collarbone. Jungkook's jaw tightened. That's what scares me. Jimin blinked. Why? Jungkook looked away for half a second, but Jimin caught it, the hesitation, the panic, the longing. Because, Jungkook whispered, I can't hide anything from you. Not when you look at me like that. Not when you get too close. He exhaled sharply. And I'm tired of pretending. Jimin swallowed hard. Pretending what? Jungkook closed the distance himself this time, a step that felt like lightning. His hand caught Jimin's wrist, warm and desperate. Their faces hovered barely inches apart, breath mixing, tension snapping like a frayed string pulled too tight. That I'm fine, Jungkook whispered against him, when I'm losing my mind every time you walk away from me. Jimin felt his heartbeat slam against his ribs. Then why did you push me away earlier? Because I didn't trust myself. Not with how close you were. Jungkook's voice lowered again, almost a growl. Not with how close you always are. Jimin's breath trembled. I wasn't doing anything. You were, Jungkook insisted, stepping even closer until Jimin's back brushed the edge of the mixing console. You always are. You touch me without touching me. You look at me like you're asking a question I'm scared to answer. And what answer is that? Jimin whispered. Jungkook's hand slid from his wrist to his waist, not pulling, just holding, like he needed something to anchor himself. The one that changes everything. Jimin's throat tightened. Jungkook, a beat of silence. Sharp. Hanging. Electric. Then, footsteps echoed outside the studio. Jungkook froze. Jimin did too. The doorknob rattled slightly before someone walked past, unaware. But the moment was already fractured. Their breaths were still tangled, but the tension shifted, heavier, more dangerous because now it was forbidden again. Jungkook released a slow exhale. You should go. No, Jimin said instantly. Jimin, no, he repeated. Not until you tell me the truth. All of it. Not halfway. Not almost. His hand moved up, fingers brushing Jungkook's jaw with a softness that made the younger man flinch like the touch was fire. Look at me and say what you were about to say. Jungkook's eyes fluttered shut for a moment, as if fighting a battle he'd already lost. When they opened, they were raw, unguarded, devastating. I was going to say that I can't keep pretending this is just friendship, Jungkook confessed. Not when every part of me reacts whenever you walk into a room. Not when I can't breathe right if you're upset. Not when, his voice cracked faintly. Not when seeing you close to anyone else feels like someone is twisting something inside me. Jimin's breath hitched. Jungkook, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that, Jungkook finished quietly. Or what you'll do after hearing it. Jimin looked at him, really looked, and felt the world tilt slightly under the weight of everything they had never said. He stepped closer again, slow and deliberate, until their foreheads hovered a breath apart. I'm not going anywhere, Jimin said softly. Not tonight. Not after this. Jungkook's eyes flicked to his lips, just once, just enough to expose everything. Then stay, Jungkook breathed. The room went impossibly still, and for a moment, it felt like the entire night was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The air in the studio felt charged, thick, almost vibrating with everything they'd just admitted. Jimin didn't sit. Jungkook didn't move. They stood there facing each other like two people who had been pushing against an invisible boundary for years, only to finally feel it crack. Jungkook's chest rose and fell rapidly, eyes fixed on Jimin with a mixture of fear and hunger and something painfully vulnerable. Jimin could hear the faint whir of the computers, the distant hum of the building, but everything in his body was tuned only to Jungkook. Come here, Jungkook whispered, not as an order, more like a plea he didn't know how to hold back. Jimin stepped forward without hesitation, and Jungkook's fingers curled into his sleeve, pulling him close in a way that wasn't gentle but wasn't rough either. It was the grip of someone terrified of losing control, yet terrified of losing the person standing in front of him even more. Jimin's breath ghosted over Jungkook's cheek. You're shaking. So are you, Jungkook murmured, eyes flickering like he was trying to memorize every angle of Jimin's face. I don't know what this means. I don't know what happens after tonight. Then stop thinking about after, Jimin whispered. Just be here. Jungkook's jaw clenched, his emotions flickering too fast to read. You don't understand. If I stop thinking, I'll cross lines I can't take back. Jimin lifted a hand and brushed Jungkook's hair back, his fingers barely touching but enough to make Jungkook inhale sharply. Maybe some lines were meant to be crossed. Jungkook swallowed hard. You don't know what you're saying. Then tell me, Jimin challenged. Tell me what line you think I'm talking about. Jungkook closed the distance in a sudden, breath-stealing movement, trapping Jimin between his body and the mixing console. Not touching, just standing so close that his breath fanned hot across Jimin's lips, his heartbeat pounding against Jimin's chest without even making contact. This, Jungkook said, voice low and unsteady. Every time you get this close. Every time you look at me like that. Every time I tell myself to step back and I still move toward you instead. And how do I look at you? Jimin whispered. Like you're waiting for me to slip, Jungkook answered. Like you're daring me to. Jimin let out a trembling breath. Maybe I am. Jungkook's fingers brushed Jimin's waist instinctively before he snatched them back like the touch had burned him. His eyes dropped, then rose again, slow, deliberate, almost painfully conflicted. Jimin, he said, voice cracking slightly, if you keep pushing me, I won't stop at almost. Jimin felt a shiver run through his spine. Who said I want you to stop? Jungkook recoiled half a step, as if the words hit him too hard. Don't say things like that. Not if you don't mean them. I do, Jimin answered immediately. Without blinking, Jungkook stared at him, really stared, searching for hesitation. There was none. Then something in his expression broke open, raw and sudden, like a dam finally giving way. Why now? Jungkook whispered. Why tonight? Why after I spent months trying to hide how badly he stopped himself, biting the inside of his cheek like he'd almost spilled every secret all at once. Jimin didn't let it go. He stepped forward and placed a hand over Jungkook's heart, feeling the frantic rhythm beneath his palm. Finish that sentence. Jungkook looked at him with an expression that was half agony, half desperation. How badly I want things I'm not supposed to want. Jimin didn't drop his gaze. Like what? Jungkook exhaled shakily. Like having you this close. Like hearing you say my name like you did earlier. Like, his voice lowered until it vibrated. Like touching you without stopping to think about who might see. The confession hit Jimin like heat rising under his skin. Jungkook, you think this is easy for me? Jungkook said, stepping closer again, his voice rough, strained. You think I'm not scared of ruining everything? Of ruining us? You're not ruining anything, Jimin replied. You're finally telling the truth. A sudden knock on the door cut the air like a knife. Jungkook's eyes widened. Jimin froze. Someone jiggled the handle. Hello. Lights are still on. Anyone inside? Jungkook grabbed Jimin's wrist instinctively and pulled him a step farther from the door, into the shadows beside the equipment rack. Their bodies were close enough that Jimin could feel the tension radiating off him. The door didn't open, whoever it was simply walked away after a few seconds. The sound of retreating footsteps faded down the hallway, but the damage had already been done. Jungkook was breathing hard again, adrenaline sharpening every emotion on his face. That could have been anyone, he whispered. A manager. A staff member. A trainee. Anyone. Jimin leaned closer until their foreheads almost touched. And yet you still pulled me closer instead of letting me go. Jungkook shut his eyes, as if the truth of that burned too much. Why? Jimin pressed softly. Jungkook opened his eyes slowly, dark, raw, trembling with everything he could no longer hide. Because losing you scares me more than getting caught ever will. Jimin felt his heart drop, then soar, then ache all at once. Then stop fighting this. Jungkook's voice shook. I don't know how. Then let me show you, Jimin whispered. For a long, suspended moment, they stood there breathing the same air, shadows and neon light slicing their faces, every unspoken feeling finally standing bare between them. And when Jungkook finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Then don't leave me tonight. Jimin didn't hesitate. I won't. The room seemed to tremble around them with the weight of what came next, something fragile, dangerous, beautiful, and wholly unavoidable. And as Jungkook slowly reached for Jimin again, this time without pulling back, the night felt like it was about to change everything. The wind outside the rooftop was cold, sharp, and restless, but Jimin barely felt it. His pulse was too loud, too warm, too tangled with everything that had happened over the past days. Jungkook stood a few steps away, hands gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles were white. His breath fogged in the night air, but his eyes were burning. You brought me up here, Jimin said softly. So talk to me. Jungkook didn't look back, but the tremor in his voice gave him away. If I look at you right now, I won't be able to say what I need to say. Jimin stepped closer, slow, deliberate. Then say it to the sky. I'll hear it anyway. Jungkook let out a shaky laugh that wasn't really a laugh. You always do that. Do what? Make me feel seen even when I don't want to be. Jimin's voice lowered. Is that a bad thing? No, Jungkook whispered. It's the thing that scares me the most. He finally turned, and the sight of his expression made Jimin's heart stop. Jungkook looked raw, unguarded, stripped of every wall he'd tried to build these past months. His eyes were red not from crying, but from holding back everything he'd never let himself say. Jimin, Jungkook began, I've spent so long trying to protect us, that I never stopped to ask if I was hurting you in the process. You weren't, Jimin said immediately. Jungkook flinched. Don't lie for my sake. Jimin swallowed. I wasn't lying. But I was confused. And lonely. And angry sometimes. Because I didn't understand why you kept pulling me close only to push me away again. That's the part one need to explain. Jungkook took a breath that shook his entire body. I wasn't scared of the world finding out. I wasn't scared of rumors or headlines or losing control. His throat tightened. I was scared of losing you. Losing us. Losing the only person who sees me without the lights and the noise and the expectations. Jimin felt something in his chest crack open. You never needed to hide from me. I know, Jungkook said softly. But maybe I needed time to believe that. He stepped closer, each movement tentative but certain, like someone approaching something precious they didn't know how to handle gently. When you walked out of the studio that night, Jungkook continued, I thought, that was it. That I finally did what I feared most. That I pushed you too far. I didn't leave because of that, Jimin whispered. I left because I needed you to follow me. I did. Jungkook's voice cracked. Every damn step. Jimin closed the last distance between them, and the rooftop lights cast shadows across Jungkook's face. He reached up and cupped Jungkook's cheek, his thumb brushing lightly over skin that felt too warm, too alive. You're allowed to want things, Jimin said. Even if they scare you. Jungkook leaned into the touch, eyes fluttering shut for a second. Then let me say one last thing. All of it. Without stopping. Okay, Jimin breathed. Jungkook opened his eyes, and the honesty in them struck Jimin like a storm. I love you, Jungkook said. No trembling, no hesitation, no fear. I love you in ways I don't know how to hide. In ways that kept me awake at night. In ways that made me pull you closer when I should have stepped back. In ways that make me want to protect you and ruin myself for you at the same time. Jimin felt a single tear slip down his cheek, but it wasn't sadness. It was relief. It was finally coming home. You should have told me sooner, Jimin whispered. I was afraid. And now? Jungkook took Jimin's hand, threading their fingers together with a softness that contradicted the intensity in his eyes. Now? I'm tired of fear. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of losing breath every time you walk away. Jimin stepped forward until their foreheads touched, breath mixing in the cold air. Then don't lose me. I won't, Jungkook promised. Not anymore. Jimin's voice trembled. Say it again. I love you, Jungkook said, firmer, deeper, as if carving the words into the night itself. And I don't care who knows. I don't care what happens. I just want you. I choose you. A laugh escaped Jimin, small and disbelieving. I've been waiting so long to hear that. I know, Jungkook murmured. And I'm sorry for every moment that made you doubt. I don't doubt anymore, Jimin said. Not tonight. Jungkook lifted Jimin's face with both hands, holding him like something irreplaceable, and in that still, breathless moment, there was no stage, no cameras, no fear, just two souls finally standing without shadows between them. You're mine, Jungkook whispered. And you're mine, Jimin answered. The wind rushed past them, carrying their words into the open night, and under the empty sky of the rooftop where everything began to unravel, everything finally came together. Not dramatic. Not explosive, just honest, just real, just them, and for the first time in a long time, it was enough.